All around the world, golfers are trying to lower their scores and play better golf. And yet only 1% of golfers consistently shoot in the 70s. And what we're going to talk about in this video are the skills that you need to be able to break through that 80 barrier and start shooting in the 70s. Now, in my last video about how to break 90, we talked about the essential skills that you need to start shooting in the 80s. And to recap, we need to, with our full swing, avoid any extra shots or penalties that might occur. If you're hitting the ball out of bounds, if you're hitting it into a hazard, if you're having to take an unplayable lie, those are all going to just skyrocket your scores very quickly. So we have to eliminate those. In fact, that's the first step in breaking 100, and that skill carries over when we're talking about breaking 90, or in this case, even breaking 80. That skill will always be there. It's one of the most important things that we can do is avoid adding those penalties. Now, yes, we can get away with it, and we can shoot in the 70s with a lost ball or two, but it puts a lot of pressure on the rest of our game that we don't want to have to work around. When we talk about our short game, up until this point, almost every hole, you don't even need to hit a green in regulation. You just have to get it on in +1. But that's going to change when we talk about breaking 80. Now we do have to start hitting some greens in regulation, and I'm going to talk in a minute about what that means and where you should be and how we can keep track of it. And then lastly, we've been talking about putting. And if you've heard me say this once, you've heard me say it a million times, but I believe that we are all capable of becoming world-class putters. We don't have to be 6.5 feet tall and swing 130 miles an hour, bomb it down the middle. A 3-foot putt and a 300-yard drive are worth the same. So putting is one of those areas that no matter who we are or what stage we're at in life, we can become a world-class putter. And in my last video about how to break through into the 80s, we talked about how we needed to eliminate 3 putts. And that's all going to stay the same, and yet we're going to add a couple of layers on top of it. Now, the first thing that I want to cover before we go on is what it takes to break 80 at its very essence is finishing around 7 over par or better. And this is taking into consideration the fact that most 18-hole championship courses are a par 72. Now, yes, you have some wiggle room if you're playing a course that's a par 70 or a par 71, but for all intents and purposes, we're talking about a par 72, which means 7 over par. And that's going to be a really key number when it comes to the math that we're going to look at here. Now, let's start with our full swing, the area of the game that as a teaching professional over the last decade, more than anything else, my students have wanted to work on. They've wanted to work on their driver, they've wanted to work on their full swing, they want to eliminate their slice, they want to just hit the ball a little bit farther. I mean, you name it, full swing is where the gravy's at in the mind of the student, which is probably you watching this. But I have some news for you, is when it came to breaking 100 or even breaking 90, you didn't need to hit any fairways to be able to accomplish that. And in theory, in order to break 80, you still don't need to hit fairways. Now, where this gets a little bit different is when we're talking about shooting in the 70s. We do need to hit at least 8 greens in regulation. Now, hitting fairways will help you hit more greens in regulation, but it's not necessary. Now, yes, on average, people who shoot in the 70s are hitting fairways, and it's putting them into places where they have opportunities. But just note that it's not essential to your score, but what is essential is that you stay out of trouble and you stay away from penalty shots. But as long as you're in a position where you have the opportunity of hitting at least 8 greens, now you're on to something special here. And here's what we're going to get into. When we talked about breaking 100, I said, look, you need to 3-putt half the time, and you need to 2-putt half the time. And within our math, this worked. You could break 100 using that math. But when it came to breaking 90 and shooting in the 80s, we said, look, 3 putts just aren't going to cut it. We needed 2-putt or better 100% of the time. There's no excuses for 3-putting if we're all, in theory, able of becoming world-class putters. Now, this still stands. When you're going from breaking 90 into breaking 80, if you want to shoot in the 70s, we have to get rid of those 3-putts. And yes, I get it. There's going to be times where they happen. Even the pros 3-putt time to time. But when we're practicing, that's the level we want to hold ourselves to, is getting rid of those 3 putts. So we do want to 2-putt 100% of the time or better. And that leaves us with another category that we haven't touched on a whole lot so far in this little how to break series, which is scrambling. Because when we talked about how to break 100, you didn't need to be able to scramble. When we talked about how to break 90, you still, in theory, didn't need to be able to scramble. However, when it comes to shooting in the 70s, yes, this becomes an important number. And let's do a little bit of math here. Now, we said that if our goal is to hit 8 greens in regulation, and we've eliminated 3 putts, then we know that on 8 holes, we're going to make par. So we have 8 pars. But that leaves us with 10 holes. Now, in theory, if we've only hit 8 greens in regulation, there are 10 holes that we missed the green. And this is where scrambling comes in, is we need to be able to get the ball up and down, or on the green and then in the hole with 1 putt 3 out of those 10 times, about 30%. The reason for this, again, comes back to the fact that in order to break 80, we can only go 7 over par. 72 plus 7 is 79. We already have 8 pars on the card. If we can scramble 3 times, meaning 3 chips, 3 putts, we get 3 more pars, which means because we've eliminated your 3 putts, there will be 7 holes where you don't make that putt. That gives you 7 bogeys. 11 pars and 7 bogeys is a 79, and you've broken 80. Now again, there's wiggle room here. You could always hit more greens. You could always 1-putt a certain percentage of time, but we're looking at this from the lens of which skills to develop in which order. And if you've been following along with this entire series, you've seen how going from breaking 100 to breaking 90 to breaking 80 is very simple, very small progressions in development in your skill. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. If you've gotten to this point where you're looking to break 80 and you've already done the work that you need to follow along with how to break 100 and how to break 90, this starts to become a lot easier because you've already established this skill. You're already keeping the ball in play off the tee. Now your practice can be refined. It's making sure that you're hitting enough greens during your round, and it's making sure that you're able to chip or pitch the ball close enough to get up and down 30% of the time. That's it. Follow the math. You'll finish a round with only 7 bogeys, and that is how you break 80.